The penthouse was 32 floors above Mapo-gu, and the storm had been going since midnight. Rain hit the floor-to-ceiling glass like it had a grudge. The city below was a smear of neon, red, gold, white, blurred by water into something that looked almost beautiful if you weren't paying attention to what was underneath it. Samantha Woods was paying attention to everything. She stood 3 feet inside the living room, still soaking wet, her black hoodie dripping onto what she was fairly certain was a $90,000 rug. Her heart was doing something unreasonable inside her chest. She'd counted the steps from the service elevator. She'd memorized the sight lines. She'd spent 4 days hacking the building's security architecture and another 6 hours drugging a low-level operative at a hotel bar in Itaewon to get the override code, which, yes, she knew was a morally complicated thing to do, but she'd made peace with it somewhere around floor 19 of the stairwell backup route. She had not, however, made peace with this. The man sitting at the desk in the far corner of the room had heard her come in. Of course he had. She'd known he would. Men like him didn't survive long enough to become legends by being caught off guard in their own homes. He'd simply waited. Finished the chess move he was making on the board in front of him. White queen, diagonal, calm as a surgeon, and then he turned. Jin Young-jae looked at her the way a person looks at a window that's been broken. Not with fear, with assessment. He said very quietly,
You have 30
seconds to give me a reason. And something in Samantha's chest snapped clean in half, because his voice had dropped about an octave since she last heard it. Because the boy she remembered had laughed too loud at everything and stolen her snacks and called her Sama in that particular way that made the syllables sound like an argument and a compliment at the same time. Because the person in front of her was 6 feet of controlled stillness in a dark suit, and his eyes were the kind of empty that takes years of deliberate practice to achieve. He didn't recognize her. She'd known he wouldn't. She'd prepared for it. She'd told herself, in the basement of the quantum physics lab at Johns Hopkins where she'd first understood what the machine had done, that recognition was not the point. The point was information. The point was understanding what had happened to him so she could fix it. She'd told herself a lot of things. Yesterday we were 12, she thought, and kept her face still. Welcome to Afro Korean Drama. Every story on this channel is written and produced originally. No recycled plots, no shortcuts. This one is about what it costs to love someone so much you build a machine to save them, and then discover that you were the reason they needed saving. If you've ever carried guilt that didn't announce itself until it was too late, this story is going to sit with you. Drop a comment letting me know where in the world you're watching from and what time it is right now. I genuinely want to know how far this story is traveling. Now, let's go. I'm not a threat, she said. Her voice came out steadier than she deserved. I'm a researcher. I've been studying your organization. I have information that affects your safety. Young-jae's expression didn't change, not a flicker. He stood up from the desk in one fluid movement, and she registered, the way you register a drop in temperature, that he was considerably more physically imposing than she'd accounted for in her mental model of this scenario. That, he said, is not a reason. That's an opening statement. He tilted his head slightly, and the gesture was so familiar, that exact angle, that exact quality of attention, that her hands curled into fists at her sides to stop from reacting. You're also soaking wet, which means you didn't use the front entrance, which means whatever you think you know, you understood it wouldn't be enough to get you through the door the normal way. Correct, Samantha said. Interesting. He seemed genuinely, mildly curious, the way a person might be curious about an unusual insect. Who are you? She gave him the cover name, Myray Consulting, data security firm, Seoul office. She'd built the alias 3 days ago, and it was solid. She'd checked it twice. He said nothing, crossed the distance between them without hurry, and stopped about 4 feet away, and looked at her face with an attention that made her feel anatomized. You're American, he said. Yes. Black American. Yes. Something moved through his eyes, not quite recognition, more like a frequency he'd forgotten he knew how to receive. He looked away from her face almost immediately, and she filed that away, tucked it behind her sternum, kept her breathing even. "My people will verify your company in the morning," he said. "You'll stay here tonight." He said it the way people state facts about the weather, not an invitation, not a question. "If the alias is clean, we'll talk. If it isn't, it is," she said. He almost smiled. Almost. "Then you have nothing to worry about." She had approximately everything to worry about, but she nodded, and he gestured to a door on the far side of the room, and she followed him, and as she passed his desk, she saw the chessboard. White queen, center of the board, completely alone, every other piece cleared to the edges. He always set it up that way at the end of the night, she would learn later. Never a full game, always just the queen, alone in the middle, surrounded by empty space. She didn't understand yet that it was her. She'd been given a guest room with a view of the Han River and a lock that she was reasonably certain she could bypass in under a minute. She didn't bypass it. She sat on the bed and allowed herself, for the first time in 4 days, to breathe. Here's what Samantha Woods knew about time travel that nobody else on Earth knew. It was real, it was catastrophically unstable, and it had ruined her life in a very specific and documentable way. She'd been 28 when the accident happened. Youngest faculty researcher at Johns Hopkins Quantum Physics Division, funded by a grant she'd written herself at 26. The machine was theoretical for 3 years and functional for about 40 seconds before it stopped being functional and started being a personal crisis. The malfunction didn't destroy the lab, it didn't leave a crater, it just took her. Folded her out of 2024 and dropped her into Seoul 15 years ahead of the moment she'd been trying to reach. She'd been trying to reach 2009. She'd been trying to go back and stop her father from taking the train route that killed him when she was 9 years old. Instead, she'd arrived in 2039, in a Seoul she didn't recognize, with no phone, no ID, and the clothes she'd been wearing in the lab, which were, she would later acknowledge, not ideal for a covert arrival in the future. It took her 3 days to understand the scope of what had happened. She had no presence in this timeline. No passport, no records, no social security history, no university affiliation. She searched her own name in every database she could access. She found a death certificate. Samantha Woods, age 13, date of death, Seoul, South Korea. Cause, drowning. The file was thin and bureaucratic, and it listed a next of kin notification to a Dr. Evelyn Woods of Baltimore, Maryland, and reading her mother's name in that context made her sit down on the floor of a PC Bang in Hongdae and stare at the ceiling for a while. She wasn't dead. She was manifestly, demonstrably not dead. She was sitting on a slightly sticky floor, eating a convenience store triangle sandwich and having a minor crisis of identity. But the record said she was dead, which meant that in this timeline at age 13, something had gone wrong. And the only thing that had been different about her life at 13 compared to 12 was the machine. The experiment she'd been running in secret since she was 11, in the storage unit her uncle rented in Itaewon, during the years her family lived in Seoul while her father was alive. She'd disappeared, and her disappearance had been recorded as a death, which meant that somewhere in this timeline, at some point when Samantha was 13, she had gone into that storage unit and run an earlier, cruder version of the experiment and vanished, and nobody had known what happened to her, and the world had written her off as drowned. She sat with that for about 48 hours. Then she started looking for young Jay. She'd found him on the 5th day. Not because she'd expected to. She'd been looking for stability, for a familiar anchor in an unfamiliar world, the way you look for a face you know in a crowd when you're lost. She'd looked for him the way you look for anyone who used to matter, with low expectations and a kind of dull preparatory grief. She'd found his name in a financial crime bulletin, then in a Ministry of Justice investigation file that she absolutely should not have been able to access, then in a photograph, grainy and taken from a distance, of a man entering a building in Yoido that 3 different agencies were watching. The boy who'd sat across from her at a folding table in her uncle's storage unit and insisted that knights were the best piece on the board because they were the only ones who could jump over obstacles. That boy was now running one of the most structured criminal organizations in East Asia. She'd stared at the photograph for a long time. Then she'd started building a plan. She gave herself 4 days of observation before she made contact. 4 days of careful, surgical intelligence work, hacking his inner network's peripheral nodes, tapping to building management systems, accessing security footage without triggering alerts, which was a thing she could do because she was, genuinely, a once-in-a-generation quantum physicist with a secondary specialty in computational architecture, and also because she had nothing to lose and therefore no reason to be cautious. What she saw, watching him from the outside, was efficiency. Young Jae ran his organization the way she ran a proof. No wasted steps, no redundant variables, each element serving a precise function. She watched him in 3 meetings captured by cameras he didn't know existed, and in all 3 he said less than anyone else in the room and ended the conversation having gotten exactly what he wanted. She watched him dismiss 2 men who'd failed a simple task, and the dismissal was so quiet and so final that the men in question seemed almost grateful to leave. She watched him stand at his window at 11 p.m. and look at Seoul for a long time without moving. She watched him play chess online at 2 a.m. This was the part she hadn't expected. He played on a private server, anonymous, no username attached to his real identity. The handle was a string of numbers. She'd tracked it through the platform's back end because she was bored and thorough. And then one night, instead of just watching, she did something that was either very smart or very stupid, and she decided later it was both. She logged on with a dummy account, requested a match. He accepted. She opened with the Fool's Gambit, which was not a real chess opening and had no formal name, but was something she'd invented at age 11 and only ever played against one person, because it was aggressive and counterintuitive and required your opponent to trust you even when the board looked like you were losing. He'd destroyed her every time she'd played it. She'd loved it anyway. She opened with it, and then she watched the typing indicator appear and stop, appear and stop. For 47 seconds, he made no move. When he finally played, he countered with a defensive configuration she'd never seen from him as a child. Cautious, protective. He'd learned to protect himself. She felt the knowledge of that land somewhere in her chest like a stone dropping into still water, and she kept playing. She won in 19 moves. It was the first time she'd ever beaten the Fool's Gambit version of him. He didn't resign. He let the game play out to checkmate. And then the chat indicator appeared, which surprised her because the platform was anonymous and nobody on it ever chatted. He typed, "Where did you learn that opening?" She stared at the message. She typed back, "I made it up when I was a kid." Long pause. Then, "So did I." She closed the session, sat in the dark of the PC bang with her heart doing something complicated, ordered another instant coffee she didn't need, and started planning the penthouse approach. On the second morning, Young Jae's head of security, a compact and precisely unreadable man named Baek Sungmin, informed her that Mirai Consulting had checked out. She was given access to the penthouse common areas. She was not given access to Young Jae. He had, it turned out, a very structured day. She was able to observe pieces of it from the edges of rooms she was technically allowed to be in. He held a morning briefing she wasn't invited to, ate lunch alone with a view of the river, took 2 phone calls she couldn't hear, and appeared in the living room at 7 p.m. looking exactly as composed as he'd looked at 2 in the morning 2 nights before. She was sitting on the couch pretending to review documents on a tablet when he stopped walking, looked at her for a moment, and said, "Do you play chess?" She looked up, kept her face arranged. "A little." He sat down across from her and set the board on the coffee table between them with the ease of someone who'd done it 10,000 times. Most people say that when they play reasonably well and don't want to seem arrogant. Or when they play badly and don't want to seem incompetent. Which are you? "Sit down and find out," she said, and immediately wondered if that was too familiar, too quick, too much of her actual voice leaking through. He sat. He started setting up pieces, white for her, black for him. She noticed, without letting herself react to it, that he set up the white queen last and set her in the center and looked at her for just a half-second too long before completing the arrangement. They played. She lost, deliberately but not insultingly. She played to a middle level, let him win in 32 moves, kept her expression interested and slightly frustrated the way a good-faith loser would. He said nothing during the game except once, when she moved a knight across 3 squares in an odd configuration, and he paused. "That's an unusual move," he said. "Is it bad?" He looked at the board. "No, it's creative. A beat. I've seen something like it before." She moved a pawn. "From who?" The silence had a texture to it. "I don't remember," he said, and moved his bishop, and ended the conversation. She noted the white envelope on his desk, which she'd catalogued on day 1 and researched on day 2. The name on it was Park Sun-hee. She'd found Park Sun-hee in a death notice from 3 years ago. A woman in her late 70s, Mapo-gu, survived by no family. The notice mentioned she was known in the neighborhood for selling tteokbokki from a small cart near the Mapo intersection. Samantha had eaten that tteokbokki. She'd been 11. She'd dragged young Jay there on a rainy afternoon because she'd followed her nose 3 blocks, and he'd complained the entire way about getting his shoes wet, and then eaten 4 servings and pretended it wasn't that good. The woman had known them, had called them the strange pair, had always given them extra fish cake. Samantha looked at the envelope on the desk, thought about the address she still remembered because she remembered everything. That was the whole problem. She remembered all of it perfectly, and he remembered none. She said, without fully deciding to, "The address is 14-3, Mapodero 4 Gil, apartment 7B. Young Jay went very still. She'd been watching his hands. They were flat on the table, either side of the chessboard, and they stopped moving in a way that wasn't stillness so much as suspension, the moment before a reflex completes. He looked at her. Really looked, for the first time since she'd arrived, and not with the detached, professional assessment she'd been getting. Something else. Something that didn't have a clean English word. "What did you say?" His voice was even. The effort of keeping it even was visible, which was the most visible anything about him had been. "The woman on the envelope," Samantha said carefully. "Park Sun-hee. She lived at that address. You've been trying to deliver that envelope for 3 years. "How do you know that?" "I knew her," she said, "when I was a child, in this neighborhood, the tteokbokki cart." Something happened in his face. Not cracking, not yet, more like a hairline fracture, a fault line showing itself before the quake. "You couldn't have," he said. "She died 3 years ago, I know. I looked her up." Samantha kept her voice soft. "I'm sorry. She was kind." Young Jay stood abruptly and walked to the window, his back to her. The rain had started again outside. She'd noticed the pattern by now. Rain in Seoul in this season was near constant, but it felt less meteorological than choreographed. Rain every time the air changed between them. He stood at the window for a long time. She didn't fill the silence. Finally, without turning, "How old were you?" 11, she said. 12 by the end." "And then you left?" "Yes." Her throat tightened. "I left." He turned then, and his face had rearranged itself back into composed, but it was the kind of composed that comes after something, and they both knew it. He looked at her for a moment. Then he picked up the chess queen from the board and set it gently back down. "The endgame position," he said. "The opening you used in the second game, when you let me win. You made an error on move 17 that wasn't an error." His voice was level. "You were controlling the board while pretending you weren't." She said nothing. "I've played a lot of people," he said. "I know what someone looks like when they're playing below their level." A pause. "Who are you actually?" And she looked at him, this man who had her friend's face and a stranger's eyes, who kept a dead woman's condolence envelope because he couldn't let go of something he couldn't even name. And she told herself, not yet. The timing wasn't right. He needed to come to it, not be led. Someone who's trying to understand what happened to you, she said. And why? He studied her. The silence stretched. Then, get some sleep, Ms. Woods. Tomorrow is going to be a long day. He left. She sat there with the chessboard between her and the empty chair, and the rain loud against the glass, and thought, this is going to destroy both of us. The long day he'd referenced arrived at 5:30 in the morning. Baek Sung-min opened her door without knocking, which told her something had changed in the hierarchy of how she was being perceived. He said, there's an issue with the verification. We need to talk through some details. He meant, there's a gap they'd found. A small one, she'd expected this, had planted a deliberate minor inconsistency to see how they'd respond, a trick her thesis advisor had taught her for identifying an adversary's investigative method. But she hadn't expected them to move this fast. She was brought to a room on a lower floor that she hadn't seen before. Bare, fluorescent lighting, a table, 2 chairs. Young Jae sat in one of them. There was a gun on the table. She looked at it. She looked at him. She sat down. The founding date of Mirai Consulting is 3 months after the Seoul Business Registration Office closed for digital filings, he said. There was a chessboard on the table. She hadn't noticed it immediately. He'd placed it to the side, not in the center. It wasn't decoration. It wasn't a game. It was a reference point, a context. Someone built your company in a window that doesn't exist. Someone did, she agreed. That someone is you. That someone is me. He leaned forward slightly. Then let's try this without the courtesy. Who sent you here? What do you want? And how much do you actually know about my operation? The interrogation that followed was controlled and cold, and she had the distinct sense throughout it that he was capable of being much worse than this and was choosing not to be, which was itself a form of pressure, the implication that restraint was a choice he was making provisionally. She answered some questions truthfully, deflected others, constructed partial lies that were architecturally consistent with her cover. She was good at this. She'd had, in the past several days, excellent practice. And then she made a mistake. Not a strategic mistake, a body mistake, the kind that happens below the level of conscious decision. He said something sharp and sudden, a shift in tactic, raising his voice slightly for the first time. And her right hand moved, her pinky finger extending outward and curling slightly against the edge of the table. It was a thing she'd always done. A childhood tic, stress response, the physical memory of pinky promises extended toward someone who would hold them. She'd done it at 12 during tests she was nervous about. She did it at 28 when her funding reviews got hostile. She did it now. And young Jae stopped talking. Not gradually, not professionally. He stopped mid-sentence and looked at her hand. She didn't move. The room was very quiet. The fluorescent light hummed. Somewhere outside, rain. He looked at her hand for a long time. Then he sat back and his face did something complicated. Not cracking, not yet, but something working underneath it. Something turning over like a stone in fast water. There's a bridge, he said. He wasn't asking her. He wasn't even really talking to her. He was talking to something inside his own head that had just knocked on a door from the wrong side. In Mapo, on the way to the river, there's... He stopped, pressed 2 fingers to his collarbone briefly, unconsciously, right where the scar was. Her heart stopped. A girl, he said, very quietly. Rain, she... He looked up. His eyes were completely unguarded for approximately 2 seconds, which was the most she'd ever seen from him and which was, in its way, devastating. She always won. Samantha's voice came out barely above a whisper. She always beat you at chess. The 2 seconds ended. The guards came back up, but something was different. Something had shifted tectonic, and they both felt it. He stood, picked up the gun from the table without pointing it at her, walked to the door, stopped. "You're not leaving this building," he said, "until I understand what you are." "That's fair," she said. He left. She put her hands flat on the table and breathed. The next 3 days were a different kind of interrogation. No guns, no bare rooms. He simply kept her close. She accompanied him to portions of his workday she was not sure she was supposed to see, and understood that this was intentional. He was testing how she responded to what he was, whether she flinched or calculated or tried to use it. She did none of those things. She watched him work, and she thought about the boy who had argued with her for 40 minutes about whether a bishop or a rook was more valuable in the endgame. And she kept both of those people in focus at the same time and tried not to let either of them break her. On the second day, she found the file. She wasn't snooping exactly. She'd been given open access to the business systems, which was its own kind of test, and she was reviewing financial structures in the building's server room when she found a subfolder with a date from 23 years ago. She opened it. It was a contract. Not a business contract, the kind of contract that gets written in rooms without witnesses, on paper that was never meant to be preserved. A transfer of custody arrangement between a man named Chun Dae-ho and a private organization that went by 3 different names across 3 different subsidiary registrations. The custody subject was listed only by initials and a birth year. JYJ, born 2009, Jin Young Jae, age 13. She read the date of the contract, counted backward. It was 6 weeks after she disappeared. She sat with that for a very long time. The server room hummed around her. The building's HVAC system breathed in and out. She read the contract 3 more times, confirming what she already knew, which was that her absence had done exactly what she'd feared it had done, which was that the boy she'd left behind had been unprotected, that her disappearance had created a vacuum in his small ecosystem of stability, that Chun Dae-ho, she ran the name, took her 11 minutes, found a dead man who'd run a loan shark operation out of Mapo in the early teens, had moved into that vacuum the way predators always move into vacuums, with patience and strategic gentleness. Young Jae had been taken because nobody was looking for the warning signs. His parents were gone, she'd known that, had always known they were both out of the picture in different ways, a father who was elsewhere and a mother who was gone. He'd had a rotating cast of relatives and the loose stability of neighborhood life and her, and she'd removed herself, and the rest had followed like dominoes that couldn't be stopped because they'd already started falling. She put the folder back, closed the server, walked to the bathroom in the corridor and ran cold water over her hands and wrists for a while. She thought about what it felt like to be the most intelligent person in a room and also, demonstrably, the person who'd caused the most damage. She thought, I'm going to fix this. I'm going to fix it, or I'm going to spend the rest of my life in a timeline I created by accident, watching him run an empire he built from the rubble of an absence I caused. She dried her hands. She went back to work. On the 3rd day, she told him, not everything, not the time travel. She wasn't ready for that conversation, and he wasn't ready to hear it. But she found him in his office at midnight, alone with the chessboard and a glass of something amber-colored he wasn't drinking, and she sat down across from him without being invited, and she said, I knew you. He looked at her. When we were 12, she said, you and I, in Mapo, there was a storage unit in Itaewon that my uncle rented. You used to come there after school. The room was completely silent except for the rain outside, which had started again an hour ago. You're not real, he said, not aggressively, almost curiously, the way someone might say a thing they need to say out loud to test how it sounds. I'm standing right here. Sama died at 13. The name in his mouth, that exact shape of it, the way the syllables had sounded when she was 12 and he was being annoying and endearing at the same time. She felt her throat constrict and didn't let it show. What do you remember? She said. Specifically, not what the records say. What do you actually remember? He was quiet for a long time. She didn't push. Outside, the Han River was somewhere in the dark and the rain, and Seoul below them was doing whatever Seoul did at midnight, which was operate at about 70% of its daytime volume and occasionally send a siren up from the street. "Rain," he said finally. "A bridge. A promise." His hand moved just slightly toward his pinky finger and stopped. "Losing at chess." A pause. "Every time. To someone who laughed when she won but pretended she hadn't." Samantha laughed. She couldn't help it. It came out soft and a little wet, and she pressed her mouth together to stop it, but it was already out, and she watched something happen in his face that she'd never seen on it in the 5 days she'd known this version of him. Something unlocked. Not completely, but enough. "You can't be her," he said, but he said it differently now. He said it like a person who needs something to be false and is beginning to suspect it isn't. "I can explain how," she said. "The science is real. It's complicated and it sounds insane, and I'll prove every part of it if you give me time." She leaned forward slightly. "But first, I need you to understand that I didn't leave on purpose. I didn't choose to disappear, and I have spent—" her voice fractured just slightly, "a significant amount of my adult life trying to figure out how to find you and fix what I broke." The silence that followed was the longest of her life. Young Jay set the chess queen down on the center of the board, looked at it. Then he said very quietly, "Tell me the chess opening, the real one, the one you invented." "The fool's gambit," she said. "You sacrifice your bishop's pawn early to create a false sense of control on the king's side. The point is that you're never actually losing. You're just letting your opponent believe they're winning so they don't watch what you're building on the other side." He looked at her. "You played it online 3 nights ago," he said, "against an anonymous account." Her heart lurched. "You knew." "I suspected." His jaw was tight. "I've been suspicious since you walked into this apartment dripping on my rug." The ghost of something that might, under different circumstances, have been a smile. "You're not subtle, Sam." The name. The old name. She felt it hit her somewhere behind the sternum. "You remember," she said. "I remember everything," he said, and the 3 words came out with a weight that told her he'd been carrying them for 23 years without knowing what to do with them. And she understood then that memory had never been the problem. The problem was that the memories had no explanation, and memories without explanation become ghosts, and he'd been haunted in a very particular way and had built an empire partly to outrun it. The next 2 days were something she hadn't planned for, which was the problem with planning for human beings. They don't behave like controlled experiments. He didn't soften exactly. Young Jay at 35 was not in the business of softening, but he became present in a way he hadn't been. He answered her questions about the organization's structure with a directness that suggested he'd decided, provisionally, that she was safe to be direct with. She answered his questions about the time travel with the same directness, watching his face cycle through skepticism, reluctant analysis, and eventual grudging scientific engagement. Because he was, under everything, deeply curious, always had been. It was one of the things she'd liked most about him. She told him about the machine, the malfunction, the 15-year jump, the death certificate with her name on it. She did not yet tell him the whole truth about the choice she was going to have to make, because she hadn't finished preparing herself for that conversation, and also because she was, she would admit internally, procrastinating with the particular desperation of someone who knows the thing they're avoiding is inevitable. She told him about the file she'd found, the contract, Chun Dae-ho. He listened without expression. When she finished, he said, "I know about Dae-ho. I dealt with him 7 years ago." She understood what "dealt with" meant and didn't ask for specifics. "He's not the point," she said. "The point is why it happened, the sequence." "My parents were already gone," she said. "Yes, but you had stability. You had the neighborhood. You had—" She stopped. "You had me, and then you didn't, and the timeline shifted because of that absence, and Dae-ho saw the opening." Young Jay looked at his hands, flat on the desk, either side of the chessboard, the way they'd been in the interrogation room. You're saying your disappearance caused my kidnapping? I'm saying my disappearance created the conditions that made your kidnapping possible. There's a difference between those two things. I know. That's why I said the second one. He was quiet. He touched the scar near his collarbone briefly, the same unconscious gesture she'd seen in the interrogation room. She thought about what the scans she'd done of the original timeline's records had shown. His medical history from before the accident, a childhood and adolescence of ordinary scrapes, nothing near the collarbone. The scar was new. Not new recent, it was old, healed over, the kind that had been made when the body was young enough to scar that way. But new in the sense that it should not have existed. Does it still hurt? She asked. He looked up, understood what she meant, knew she wasn't asking about the scar. Some things, he said, you stop expecting to stop hurting. You just integrate it. That's a very grown-up way to put it. I've had 23 years to develop grown-up ways to put things. Young Jae. She said his name directly for the first time and watched it land on him. I can fix it. The timeline. I can go back and stop the experiment, stop myself from disappearing. You grow up intact. No Daeho, no kidnapping, no... She gestured slightly at the room, at the building, at all of it. He said nothing. No scar, she said. The silence was very heavy. And you? He asked. What happens to you? I go back. I'm 13 again in the storage unit, and I don't run the experiment, and the timeline resets from that point. And this version of me. He said it carefully. This conversation. What happens to it? She made herself look at him. It doesn't happen. He won't remember me. You won't, she corrected herself. He won't know to look for me. There'll be no memory of this. We'll be strangers. He looked at the chessboard for a long time. So you come back, he said, find out you broke my life, rebuild the connection, and then erase it. To give you a better one. Without asking me. I'm asking you now. You're informing me now, he said, with a decision you've already made. He looked up. His eyes were very direct. You're not asking me. You're saying goodbye. She opened her mouth, closed it. He was right. He'd always been too good at reading boards. She gave herself one more day. She spent it working because working was what she did when she couldn't tolerate her feelings. She refined the reset calculations, triple-checked the return mechanism she'd built from salvaged components in a rented workspace in Hongdae, reviewed the precise moment she needed to return to, which was approximately 6 minutes before the 12-year-old version of herself ran the experiment for the first time, in that storage unit in Itaewon, on a Thursday afternoon in October, while her father was still alive and young Jae was waiting for her at the corner, and she'd told him, "Go ahead, I'll catch up. Just give me 10 minutes." She'd never caught up. She spent the evening with young Jae. They played chess, real chess this time. She played at full capacity, he played at full capacity, and it lasted 40 minutes and ended in a draw that neither of them particularly intended, but that felt, when it happened, like the right answer. He said, after, "I've been thinking about the reset." Okay. The version of me that grows up intact. He moved the white queen with one finger, a small adjustment, centering it. He won't know any of this, but he'll still be him. Curiosity, chess, being terrible at losing. You're not terrible at losing. You graciously accepted a draw from a woman who beat you online 3 nights ago. I graciously accepted a draw from a woman who I definitely let draw me, he said, and she laughed again, and there it was again, the thing in his face, that unlocked quality, brief and real. He'll be fine, she said. Better than fine. And you? I'll be 13, and I won't run the experiment, and I won't invent time travel at 28, which means probably a somewhat different career, and I won't come to Seoul in 2039, and you'll be fine, he said. She heard the thing underneath it, the thing neither of them was going to say directly, because they were both people who processed feelings through sideways approaches, and they were running out of time for the long way around. Young Jae. She stopped, tried again. I'm sorry. For disappearing. For what it cost you. I know that doesn't… Stop. Not unkindly. Don't apologize for a thing you did at 12, by accident, that you spent 23 years trying to fix. He looked at her steadily. You're the most infuriating person I've ever met, and you're also the only person who's ever beaten me at chess, which I suspect is related. It's related, she agreed. Go fix it, he said. That's what you do. You fix things. She nodded, stood, and there was a moment where neither of them moved, where the rain was loud outside and the chess queen was in the center of the board and Seoul hummed below them and 23 years of absence and 5 days of presence and a whole lifetime of what if sat in the room between them. And then she picked up her jacket and he walked her to the elevator, and neither of them touched each other, and neither of them needed to. The elevator opened. She stepped in. He stood in the corridor. Young Jae, she said. He looked at her. She extended her right hand, pinky finger out. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he crossed to the elevator, hooked his pinky around hers once, briefly. She pulled away first. The elevator closed. The rooftop was the highest point. She'd chosen it because of the sight lines. The return mechanism needed open sky, no signal interference from surrounding structures, and not because of the rain, though the rain had come again right on cue because apparently fate had a thing about atmosphere. She stood at the edge of the roof with Seoul spread below her in every direction, and she checked the mechanism one final time, and she thought about her father, who was alive in the timeline she was returning to, who had about 2 years left before the train, and the girl she was going to be when she got back was not going to be able to stop that either, because she was going to be 13, and she was going to have to find another way to be in the world, without the machine, without the obsession, without the particular genius that grief had sharpened her into. She was going to be ordinary, maybe, or a different kind of extraordinary. She heard the rooftop door open behind her. She turned. Young Jae stood in the rain. No umbrella, no jacket. He'd clearly come up immediately after she left, which meant he'd taken the stairs. His suit was getting soaked. He looked at her across the roof, and the rain was between them, and Seoul was below them, and she thought, edge of reality. This is exactly what that feels like. He walked toward her, stopped about 3 feet away, which was the same distance as the night she'd broken into his penthouse, which seemed intentional on both their parts. You could stay, he said, not begging, just offering a variable she hadn't calculated. No, I couldn't. The timeline you'd be leaving, it already exists. What's the harm? He's 23 years of harm, she said. Your alternate version. Every year he spent building walls instead of bridges. Every morning he woke up and the memories didn't make sense. Every time he played chess alone at 2 in the morning because he couldn't figure out why it felt like he was missing a player. She looked at him steadily through the rain. That's the harm. He was quiet. I built the machine to save my father, she said. I couldn't, but I can do this. I can save you, and that's… Her voice did something she didn't entirely control. That's enough. That's a good reason to have been this smart. Young Jae looked at her for a long time. The rain came down. Neither of them moved. He's going to be fine, he said quietly. The other version. He's going to be great, she said. He's already great. He was always going to be great. I just needed to get out of the way of it. He nodded. Once. The gesture was so him. That economical acceptance of a fact once he'd processed it. No drama, just a conclusion reached and acknowledged. Why did you leave me? He asked, quietly. The original question. The one from 23 years ago that had never had an answer. I'm fixing it, she said. He understood. She watched him understand, watched it move through him, and he didn't beg and he didn't argue, and he just looked at her with the most unguarded expression she'd seen on any version of his face, and she looked back, and the rain came down, and Seoul breathed below them. She activated the mechanism. She had about 45 seconds. "Young-jae," she said. "Sam, you were always the better chess player. I just cheated better." Something broke in his face then, not painfully, more like the way a fist unclenches, releasing something it's held too tight for too long. He laughed. She'd never heard him laugh in this timeline before, and it was exactly the same as when they were 12, which was the last thing she was prepared for, and she was grateful she only had 40 seconds left because she didn't trust herself past that. She felt the timeline begin to shift, the edges of things going soft, the rain still real, still cold, still there, and then less there. Pulling back, or her pulling back from it, she wasn't sure which. She watched him watching her dissolve, and he didn't look away, and she was grateful for that too. The last thing she saw was his face in the rain. The last thing she felt was the absence of the pinky she'd pulled away from. Then Seoul in 2039 closed like a book. The storage unit smelled like industrial solvent and her uncle's old tools and the particular dusty warmth of a small enclosed space that's been sealed through summer heat. Samantha Woods was 13 years old, and she was standing in front of a machine that didn't work yet. The components were arranged on the work table the way she'd spent 3 weeks planning them. The theoretical framework was in her notebooks, which were in her backpack, which was on the floor by the door. She'd told Young-jae she'd be 10 minutes. He was waiting at the corner. She looked at the machine for a long time. She was 13 and brilliant and full of grief about her father, and so certain, with the particular certainty of a mind that had never yet encountered a problem it couldn't solve, that she could fix this. That intelligence was enough, that if you were smart enough, you could outrun loss. She'd learn, later, that this wasn't true. She was learning it now. She picked up her backpack. She turned off the storage unit light. She went to meet him at the corner. Years later, it rained. It rained the way it rains in Seoul in autumn, sideways and gray and smelling like the river, like concrete, like something that has been here longer than any of the people moving through it. Samantha was 31. She'd studied at KAIST on a full scholarship, completed a postdoc in quantum materials at a university in Daejeon, and was now working for a private research firm in Mapo-gu, which was not an accident of geography, even if she couldn't have articulated why she'd accepted this posting over the 2 others she'd been offered. She was walking to the subway. The street was crowded in the pre-evening rush, everyone moving with the particular Korean urban efficiency that she'd absorbed into her rhythm over years of living here. And she was thinking about a data anomaly in her morning results and whether she wanted dakgalbi or kimbap for dinner when she saw him. He was across the flow of people, moving the other direction, tall in a gray coat, looking at his phone. Ordinary. Unremarkable, except that nothing about him was actually unremarkable. There was something in the way he moved, some quality of presence that her eyes snagged on without knowing why. He stopped. She stopped. He looked up from his phone, and their eyes met across the crowd, and something happened. She felt it happen, felt it in the specific anatomical location of her sternum, felt it the way you feel the moment before a memory surfaces, that reaching sensation of something just out of grasp. He looked at her. He didn't recognize her. She could see that clearly. His face showed a kind of confused attention, the expression of someone experiencing a feeling they can't explain, a frequency their body recognizes before their mind does. She looked at him. No scar. She could see the line of his collar, and there was no scar. She could breathe. He was ordinary. He was fine. He was exactly the person she'd needed him to be, standing in the rain on a crowded street in the city they'd both grown up in, looking at a stranger with his head slightly tilted and that particular quality of attention that she recognized from 1,000 chess games. He stayed for a moment. Then he put his phone back in his pocket, and he turned, and he walked away into the rain, disappearing into the crowd the way people disappear when they've never been anything other than a stranger. She stood on the corner and watched the space where he'd been. The rain came down. Saving him meant losing him. She'd known that. She'd always known that. She'd made peace with it somewhere between the rooftop and the storage unit, in the folding of time that she'd fallen through, and she'd made peace with it again somewhere between 23 and 31, in the long and quiet years of being ordinary and also, still, herself. She pulled her coat closer. She looked at her right hand briefly, extended her pinky finger, the old unconscious habit, against the wet air. Let it drop. She went to get the kimbap. She was going to be fine. She was going to be fine in the very specific and hard-won way that people are fine when they've lost something they chose to give up, which is different from being fine about something that was taken, and which is, she'd found, a more durable kind of fine. The rain kept going. Seoul kept going. She kept going. She always did. This story was written and produced for Afro Korean Drama. Original content every time, from the first word to the last. This one sat with me a while. Samantha didn't just sacrifice a relationship. She sacrificed the version of herself that genius and grief had built, and chose to become someone she hadn't planned. I keep thinking about that exchange on the rooftop when she said, "I'm fixing it," and he understood. No argument, no begging, just two people who were raised for a while in the same small space, being exactly who they'd always been. Tell me, do you think she made the right choice? And here's the one that gets me. If you had to choose between someone knowing you fully and someone living well, which would you choose? Drop it in the comments. I want to read everything you write. And if you want to be here for the next story, and there's always a next story, consider subscribing. I'll see you there.